Hey, friends. I'm not really sure even what to begin with or tell you, other than just this past week's been pretty tough. I think most of you know that I lived on the south side of Chicago for a number of years in a mostly African American community. And the black folk I lived around were delightful folks all the time who took care of me, being one of the lone white boys that lived in the neighborhood. Every time I read about another person being killed, especially unarmed folks, overreactions, it just breaks my heart. You know, you hear about political protests in Michigan with people carrying assault rifles. Whether that be their right to bear arms or not, I don't really care. That's inciting violence. And then a guy gets killed who doesn't resist on camera while other people watch. Now, this is not about the police at all. I have family who are police officers, and they are good people. They take care of people. You've seen how many people in the news, police and the like, going out of their way to protect others. This isn't about the police, although it keeps happening. So there's work to improve. You all probably know someone who is a police officer who is a solid, moral, wonderful human being who takes the job to protect and serve seriously. Unfortunately, there are bad seeds. There are bad seeds who are clergy. There are bad seeds who are doctors. There are bad seeds everywhere. And things don't get better when we don't do anything. A couple of you asked, how come I didn't say anything Sunday? Well, partially because I recorded before Sunday, and partially because I just don't know what to say. I'm truly stuck. I just don't know what to tell you. I just know that there's a pandemic happening, and the politicization of this pandemic makes me sick, where there are over 100,000 people dead, and it's cheered as a victory lap that it's not 100 million. I mean, come on. It's 100,000 lives, 100,000 people dead. And in the midst of this, someone gets murdered over a potential fraudulent check for $20. What gives? And now some of you are probably thinking about these riots and saying, well, that's not how you protest. Well, here's the deal. If you're white, you don't get to have a say in this. There are people coming around in different areas inciting violence who aren't from the community. I have two good friends who live 2 blocks away from this in Minneapolis, and have been watching Humvees and armored vehicles roll into their neighborhood firing bullets and tear gas, and they got threatened on their front porch for sitting on their front porch in their own home. So what gives with that? I just don't know. I have friends in Chicago, back where I live, who are saying it's getting violent in Chicago now. Chicago had one of the worst violent weekends they've had in a very, very long time. And then I hear people saying, well, they're going to be spreading COVID-19. And I'm like, yeah, probably, as opposed to the protesters that no one was complaining about in Michigan who weren't wearing masks but had guns and happened to be white. I don't know where to go with this. My usual way to cope with stress and anxiety and things like this is to build or to create or to exercise. So I took a nice little 20-mile jaunt on my bicycle today thinking maybe I'd feel a little better. Went the farthest I've been away from home since March, all the way down to scenic Belgium. I don't feel any better. I'm sore, so I guess there's that, but I don't feel any better about what's happening right now all over this country. And some people will say, well, that's just the way some people act. And I'm like, no, this isn't the first time this has happened. It's happened over and over and over again. And it doesn't stop unless everybody gets involved. And I don't know what to tell you. I know the sundowner rules that used to be in effect in Sheboygan, and we have a very, very checkered racial history in this town. And frankly, I don't find it to be much better these days. What do you do? What do you do when you watch someone get murdered for no reason because of the color of his skin? It blows my mind, and I don't even know how to respond. When I was in college at Hope in Michigan, growing up in rural Michigan and going to a big city like Holland. You know, Holland is not, I don't think it's even as big as Sheboygan. It's probably about the same. Not an overly diverse area because it's a bunch of Hollanders, kind of like where I live now, kind of like my heritage. But I had one professor at Hope College. He was just Doc. That's just how he was referred. And Doc was this gentle soul who taught all sorts of literature because that was my major. And he asked me one time, I must have been like a sophomore. I think I probably had just declared my major after recognizing that chemistry and I were not going to be best friends going forward. And Doc had said, hey, I got a class that you might like. And up until that point in my life, I had not read a whole lot of authors outside of the classics, struggling through things like Moby Dick and War and Peace and all the books you're supposed to read and you're supposed to like if you're an intellectual. And truth be told, they're brilliant books, don't do a lot for me. And Doc told me, he's like, take this class with me. It was African American literature. And I read books that I would have never, ever come into contact with because they just weren't in the stream that I swam in. And I remember one specific poem from Langston Hughes that has stuck with me, and it's been, I guess, cycling over and over and over in my head. He wrote it in 1951 in a book called Montage of a Dream Deferred. The poem is, it's not really titled, but it's called Harlem, as it were. And he was writing about the black experience in a segregated region right after World War II, where all these young men served their country overseas as soldiers and came home and were treated like garbage. That their lives weren't as much and they couldn't afford to do anything and couldn't find jobs because of the color of their skin. And he writes this. What happens to a dream deferred? Does it dry up like a raisin in the sun? Does it fester like a sore and then run? Does it stink like rotten meat or crust and sugar over like syrupy sweet? Maybe it just sags like a heavy load. Or does it explode? I think you're witnessing an explosion yet again of a group of folks who have been oppressed far too long. And what else do you have to lose when you're not given anything in the first place? Now, I'm not condoning rioting and looting. It's not helping anyone, and there's enough people in the black community in these areas saying, folks, this is not the way. But what happens when you get so fed up you don't know what to do? I mean, really. I'm sure none of you have ever just started yelling at someone because you've just been pushed too far, or put your fist through drywall, or broken something, right? Well, try having that for everybody in your community. A pandemic is not bad enough, but when you get ignored in the pandemic and you find out that the stats bear out time and time again that African American folk are struggling so much more than white folk because of the systematic oppression, poor access to health care, what do you left? You've got a powder keg. I know it's different up here in Sheboygan. It's a mostly white area, as much as people talk about, oh, we're very mixed up here. No, you're not. We're just not. There are people of color up here, but not a lot. Part of it's our history. Part of it's our jobs. Part of it's the way I watch some people in this town still react. We have nothing to say. We need to listen. We need to quit slinging judgment at people who are not like us. Not because they're not humans, not because they're not beloved children of God, but because they're in a different circumstance than we are. And if you've never lived in a black neighborhood, you have no idea. I spent several delightful years on the South Side and recognized how lucky I was to be in such a caring community. But even then, watching that community be broken and hurt, not by me personally, but people who look like me, my whiteness. I just don't know what to tell you to do, folks. Take a good hard look at how you do things, at what you say, at the jokes you laugh at. But a guy, George Floyd, was murdered by the police, and nothing happened for several days. His fellow officers with him did nothing to do it. And yet I know there are some in Minneapolis and St. Paul who immediately came out and said, this is not who we are. And that's right. That's not who the police are. But you tell a group of people who keep getting treated this way that that's not what they see. I'm sorry this has rambled on long, but this has been a tough one for me. And I keep boiling over and I'm frustrated. I hope you can find a way to make some peace with this and figure out a way to move forward. I'll see if I can come up with something intelligent to tell you for tomorrow, but I just needed to let you know and vent a little bit that this is just not okay. Enjoy the rain. We're getting heat tomorrow. Enjoy it, I guess. And be safe, and we'll talk soon.